The ledger lay open on the long table in the steward's room, and the woman reading it did not look up when the last footman set his key on the wood and left. She heard the front door. She heard the gravel. She heard the particular silence of a house that has just lost the last person who knew where anything was kept. Then she turned the page. The figures were wrong. Not badly written, badly meant. Someone had carried a sum from the Michaelmas rents into the coal account and let it sit there, £340, waiting to be forgotten. She had found errors like it in a linen draper's books when she was 19 and hungry, and she had learned then that a lie in a ledger has a smell, a wrongness in the ink itself, a figure written a shade too neatly by a hand that wanted no one to look twice. She looked twice. She wrote the hour in the margin, 4 in the afternoon, the 9th of September, and under it, in her own small upright hand, the word query. Her name was Alice Bembridge, and 6 weeks earlier she had owned nothing but a trunk and a character reference from a woman who was dead. Now she sat in a house with 40 rooms and no fires lit, and she meant to stay in it, because a woman who has already lost everything is very hard to send away. The Duke of Hahn had died in June in London, of a heart that had been failing for a year, while he told no one. He left a nephew he had met 4 times, a house in the north he had not visited in 9, and debts that his man of business described, in a letter, as considerable. The nephew, Thomas, the new Duke, 31 years old and entirely unprepared, read the letter twice and understood perhaps a third of it. He understood that he was ruined before he began. He did not understand the rest until he went north to see. Alice came into it sideways. The dead woman, whose reference she carried, had been housekeeper to a family in York, and that family, hearing the new Duke wanted someone to inventory a house nobody would insure, had passed the name along the way, the poor passwork among themselves, not as a kindness, quite, but as a thing that costs nothing to give. She travelled 2 days on the outside of a coach in September rain. She arrived at Hahn on a Tuesday and found the gates open because there was no one left to close them. The staff had gone because they had not been paid since March. This was the first thing she learned, and the truest, and she did not blame them for it. A cook does not eat loyalty. By the time she reached the house, there remained one gardener too old to be hired elsewhere, a girl of about 15 who cried in the scullery and would not say why, and the new Duke himself, in his own great empty hall, in his shirt sleeves, trying to light a fire with wood that was wet. "You'll want dry kindling," Alice said from the doorway, before she had introduced herself. "That's ash, and it's green. There'll be seasoned wood in the old brewhouse, if no one's burnt it." He turned. He was a big man, dark, with a face that the world had already decided was proud, because it did not know what else to call a man who said so little. He looked at her wet coat, and her trunk, and her plain, unremarkable face, and he said, "Who are you?" "Alice Bembridge. You wrote to Mrs. Hale in York for someone to take the inventory. Mrs. Hale is dead. She sent me before she was. I can't pay you," he said. It was the first true thing he had said to anyone in a week, and he said it flatly, the way a man lays down a card he knows will lose. "You understand that? There's no money. There won't be for a year, perhaps longer. Whatever they told you in York, it was wrong. They told me nothing, she said. I came to see. She set down her trunk. That was the whole of the negotiation, and both of them knew it, and neither said so. Her one condition came that evening, over bread the girl had made badly, and a fire Alice had lit properly. Thomas had offered, awkwardly, to write her a character at least, something she could carry on, and she had refused it. I'll not be paid in promises, she said, and I'll not be thanked in them either. Here's my condition, and it's the only one I have. You'll let me see everything, every account, every letter from your uncle's man, every bill that comes to the door. You'll not spare me the bad ones to keep me. If I'm to mend this house, I'll know exactly how far it's broken, or I'll go back to York on Thursday's coach. I don't work in the dark. That's a great deal of trust to ask of a stranger, he said. No, said Alice. It's the opposite. It's how you learn whether you can give it. He looked at her a long moment. Then he got up, went to the locked bureau in the steward's room, and brought her the key. The house was the whole world now, and its condition was a sentence passed on everyone in it. 40 rooms, and fires in 2. Damp climbing the north wall of the library, where a gutter had failed, and no one had been paid to climb up and clear it. A kitchen range that drew badly, because a jackdaw had nested in the flue in spring and died there. Alice learned the house the way a surgeon learns a body, from the inside and by its failures. And within a fortnight, she knew things about Hahn that the Duke of Hahn did not. She met with Thomas each morning in the steward's room at 9 over the accounts. The first of these meetings was pure business and nothing else. She had ruled a fresh sheet into columns, owed, owing, disputed, and she took him through it line by line, and he sat across the table and made himself understand, which cost him because the man had been raised to sign things and not to read them. This one, she said, and turned the ledger. £340, moved from the rents into coal last September. Your uncle's steward did it. A man doesn't misplace £340. He hides it. Vickery, Thomas said. The steward. He's still in the village. He calls twice a week to ask when I'll want him back. Don't want him back, said Alice. The first of the house came round to her that same week, and it was the girl. Her name was Suki, and she was not 15 but 17, and the crying in the scullery had a reason Alice had guessed and did not press. On the third morning, Suki brought the tea things into the steward's room, and stood a moment, twisting her apron, and then said in a rush, "Ma'am, they said in the village you'd not stop, that you'd take what you could and go. I told them you weren't like that." She went red. I don't know why I told them. I don't know that you're not. Alice set down her pen. You don't, she agreed. Nor do I, some mornings. But I'll tell you the thing I do know, Suki, and you can hold me to it. I've slept in worse houses than this, and been paid less to leave them. Running's a habit, and I broke mine. Now, that flew in the kitchen. You've been cooking on a range that won't draw. Did anyone tell you it was your fault? Cook did, before she went. Cook was wrong, and lazy, and I'll say so to your face because it's true. There's a dead bird in the chimney. We'll have it out this afternoon, and you'll cook on a range that works, and the next bad loaf will be the ranger's doing, and not yours. She picked her pen back up. Send the old man to me when he's in. Gardener? What's his name? Pardew, ma'am. Send me Pardu." It was a small thing, but Suki went out standing straighter than she came in, and that was not nothing in a house where every other person had left. The wound came out in October, and it came out sideways, the way the true things did in that house. Thomas had begun, by then, to stay in the steward's room after the morning accounts were done, on one pretext or another. A bill he wanted explained, a letter he did not understand. Alice let him. She had begun to understand that the man was lonely, in a way that had nothing to do with the empty house, and had been true of him long before he came to it. One grey morning he stood at the window with a letter in his hand, and did not open it. She saw the direction on it, a London hand, a good one, and saw him not open it, and said nothing, because it was not her letter. "My brother," he said at last to the glass. "Edmund. This is the 4th he's sent, and I've read none of them." He turned the letter over. "You'll think me a hard man. Everyone does. It's easier than the truth, which is only that I was a coward once, and it cost me a brother, and I can't seem to stop being one." "I don't think anything," said Alice. "I've read your accounts, not your heart. They're different books." Something in that made him almost smile. He sat down, heavily, across from her, and told her, because she had not asked, which was the only condition under which a man like that will ever tell anything. "Edmund's the elder," he said. "Should have had all this by rights, but he married a woman our father wouldn't have in the house. A linen draper's daughter, no money, no name, and father cut him off entirely. Cast him out. And I stood in the hall while it was done, Alice, and I was 22 and afraid of my father, and I said nothing, not a word. I let it happen because it left everything to me. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I was keeping the estate. Edmund walked out, and I let him, and I've had 11 years to know exactly what I did." He put the letter on the table between them. "He's 40 miles off, in Lancaster, teaching other men's sons their letters for a wage. And he writes to me. That's the part I can't forgive. If he hated me, I could bear it. He writes to me as if I were the brother I never was." Alice looked at the letter. A linen draper's daughter. She kept her face still, but something turned over in her, quiet and cold, and she did not name it yet even to herself. "Then read the letter," she said. "I can't." "You can. You're only afraid it forgives you." She stood and gathered her sheets and left him alone with it, because some things a man must do without a witness. That was a mercy too, though neither of them called it one. The first of the quiet gifts appeared the next morning. She came into the steward's room and found her chair changed, the hard one gone, and in its place a good chair from somewhere in the shut-up wing with a cushion, and it had been set at the table on her side, and beside it a second lamp, so that she need not strain at the ledger in the grey northern light. She stood and looked at it. Thomas came in at 9 as if nothing were different, and sat and asked her about the coal account, and never once looked at the chair, and she understood that if she thanked him it would end. So she did not thank him. She sat in the chair. That was the thanks, and he took it. Their second meeting that drifted was about Vickery, and it began as business and ended somewhere else. She had gone to the village herself. Alice did not send for men she meant to catch, and asked the tenant of the home farm, a close-mouthed man named Brow. for the counterfoil stubs of his own rent receipts, the halves a tenant keeps when the steward tears the book. Brew had them in a tin on his own mantel, 3 years of them. And Alice sat at his kitchen table and set his stubs against the figures posted in the Hahn ledger, line by line, quarter by quarter, and the difference between what Brew had paid and what Vickery had entered was £11 a year, every year, walking quietly into a pocket that was not the estate's. She brought it back and laid it out for Thomas, the stubs and the ledger side by side, and showed him how the theft was built. Not a great grab that a man would notice, but a shaving off the top of every quarter, small enough that no single figure looked wrong, and only the tenant's own kept half could prove it. "You'd never have seen it," she said, "because you were meant not to. That's the craft of it. A big thief hangs. A patient one dies rich and respected. Vickery meant to die respected." Thomas was quiet a while. Then he said, "Not about Vickery at all. How is it you know how a thing like this is done?" "Because I've been poor," she said simply. "And the poor watch money the way the rich watch weather, because it decides everything, and we can't command it. I kept a linen draper's books at 19 for my bread. I know what an honest column looks like, because I was too frightened ever to keep a dishonest one." She squared the stubs. "Your uncle trusted a man who dressed well and spoke well, and called him Your Grace in the right tone. That's all respectability is, half the time. A good coat and the right tone." "And what are you?" he said, "with your plain coat and your queries in the margin?" "The other half," said Alice. The ease of it came on them without either noticing, which is the only way ease ever comes. It was a wet Thursday, and the accounts were done early, and Pardew had sent in the last of the apples from the old espaliered trees on the south wall. Small, brown-freckled, ugly, and, as it turned out, the best either of them had ever tasted. "These are hideous," Thomas said, turning one over. "Look at it. You couldn't sell this in a market." "You couldn't sell it," Alice agreed. "It's the wrong shape and the wrong color, and it looks like it's been dropped. Eat it." He ate it. He was silent a moment, honestly surprised. The surprise of a man who has forgotten that plain things can be good. "That's—" He looked at the apple as if it had lied to him. "That's absurd. Why is the ugly one the best one?" "Because nobody bred it to look well," she said. They left it alone to be an apple. The pretty ones in the London shops are bred for the barrow, and they taste of nothing. This one's had 100 years of no one caring how it looked. She took another. "There's a lesson in it if you want one, but I'd not insult the apple by making it carry a moral." "No," he said gravely. "Let the apple be an apple." "Let the apple be an apple," she agreed. And neither of them was quite talking about apples, and both of them knew it. And it sat there, undefended between them for a moment, before he reached for another. "Pardew says there were 40 of these trees once," Thomas said, "espaliered along the whole south wall. My grandfather's doing. 12 left now." 29, said Alice. "I counted. 12 bearing. The rest want pruning back 3 years and a season's patience, and they'll bear again. They're not dead. They're neglected, which is a different thing entirely, and mends differently. A dead tree you pull, a neglected one you apologize to, and start again. You apologize to trees." "I apologize to anything I've let go to ruin," she said. "It's only manners." And he laughed, A real one, surprising himself, the sound of it strange in that cold room like a fire lit in a shut wing. And she found she had done it on purpose, made the proud man laugh, and was absurdly pleased with herself, and hid it, and did not hide it well. They argued the whole of the next quarter hour about whether a russet was a better apple than a pippin, and neither won, and it did not matter in the least, and it was the happiest Alice had been in 4 years. The second turning of the house was Pardew, and it cost the old man more to say his piece than the girls had cost her, because he was 70 and had watched 3 generations of Hans, and did not give his good opinion to anyone under 60 as a rule. He came to the steward's room to report on the walls and stood turning his hat, and at the end of it, gruffly, looking at the floor, he said, "The espaliers. You said you'd bring 'em back. I said they could be brought back. It's you that'll do it, if your knees will." "My knees'll do." He worked his jaw. "Old Duke's father planted them. I was a boy holding the line for the man that set the pattern. Nobody's asked after them in 30 year. They asked after the rents and the timber, and never the trees." He put his hat on and took it off again, which was as near as Pardew came to feeling. "You asked after the trees. That's all. Didn't think there was anyone left as wood." "There's one," said Alice. "Prune them hard this month. I'll want to see the cuts before you tar them." "Aye," said Pardew, and at the door he stopped and touched his hat to her. Not the bob a servant gives a stranger, but the slow, deliberate touch a man gives an equal he has decided to respect, and went out. Alice sat looking at the door a while after he had gone. "You're somewhere with a roof tonight, I hope, and a fire in it, or the memory of one. And if the rain's coming down, where you are the way it's coming down on Hahn in this telling, then stay a while yet, and get warm, and hear the rest of it. There's a good deal of house left to save." The frost came early that year, and it was the frost that nearly finished them, because it burst the head of the great lead cistern in the roof space above the library one night in November, and the water came down through 3 floors in the dark, while the house slept. It was Suki who woke them, hammering on doors, and then there was no time for anything but the work. The cistern fed the whole house, and the stopcock that would close it was seized with rust and 30 yours of paint up under the freezing rafters, and the water was coming down in a sheet over the library, over the books, over the damp rotted plaster that would bring the ceiling with it if it soaked through, over 11 generations of a family's paper. Thomas got up into the roof space with a lantern and could not shift the cock. Alice came up behind him with a can of lamp oil and a length of pipe. "Move," she said. "It's not strength, it's leverage and heat. Oil on the thread all round, and give it a minute to bite. Then the pipe over the handle for the length. You're trying to turn a thing 4 inches wide with your bare hand, and no man alive could. Longer lever." She poured the oil, close and careful in the swinging light, and slid the pipe over the stubby handle so it stood out 2 feet, and said, "Now, slow. If it shears, we've lost it. So slow, lean, don't jerk." And Thomas leaned, and the great cock groaned, and gave a quarter turn, and then the rest, and the sheet of water above them stuttered and thinned and stopped. They spent the rest of the night in the library, the 2 of them and Suki, and old Pardew, roused from his cottage, moving books, not carrying them out in armfuls. Alice would not let them, Wet books, mishandled, tear themselves apart. But lifting each soaked volume flat on a board, and carrying it flat, and standing it open, fanned on its edge before the fires she had them build up in every grate, the whole long room turned to a strange field of tents made of paper, steaming faintly in the firelight. She showed Thomas how to interleave the wettest with clean linen, to draw the water without pressing. And he did it, a duke on his knees on a wet floor at 3 a.m, interleaving linen between the pages of books his uncle had never opened. And at some point in that long night, the last distance between them stopped meaning anything, though not a word of it was said, and not a hand reached for another. They worked. When the grey came up, they had saved most of it, and they stood in the wrecked bright room among the drying pages, filthy and soaked to the skin, and looked at each other. And Alice thought, "There, that," and put it away, because there was tea to be made, and a ceiling to be assessed, and no time, in a working house, for a thing that had no column to be entered in. The letter to Vickery went out in December, and it did not accuse him. Alice would not have it accuse him. It merely requested, in the new Duke's hand, that Mr. Vickery attend at the house on the 14th to assist in reconciling certain rent accounts against the tenant's own receipts, several of which had lately come to light. She wanted him confident. A frightened man destroys his papers. A confident one brings them. Between the flood and the 14th, there was a strange bright fortnight in which the house, half drowned, came more alive than it had been in years. And it was in the middle of it that Alice understood the thing she had been refusing to understand since October. It was a Sunday, and there was no work that could decently be done, and she had walked out in the cold, clear afternoon to the south wall to see Pardew's cuts on the espaliers. The pruned trees stood black and spare against the old brick, cut back hard, apologized to, waiting on a season's patience to bear again. And she stood among them in the low gold light, and let herself think the whole of it through. Once, plainly, the way she made herself think through a bad account, because a thing looked at squarely frightens less than a thing half seen. She loved him. That was the figure at the bottom of the column, and there was no moving it into another account. She had loved him somewhere around the night of the flood, or before, at the apples, or before that at the letter he could not open. It did not matter when, the sum was the same. And it could not be had. She made herself say why, in order, the way she would show Thomas why a theft was a theft. He was a duke, and she had come off the outside of a coach with a dead woman's reference. He was kind to her, yes, but she had watched him now for 3 months, and she knew exactly what his kindness was, because she had seen the whole shape of it. He was a man drowning in a ruined house, and she was the one competent thing that had walked through his door, and he leaned on her the way a falling man leans on the nearest wall. That was not love. That was need and gratitude and the peculiar closeness of two people who have carried the same weight up the same dark stair. When the house was mended, he would look up and see a plain woman of 25 who kept excellent books, and he would settle a sum on her generously, and she would go, and he would marry some pale, well-dowered girl his brother's disgrace had made it doubly necessary to marry well. She saw it entire. She did not weep, or not much, and not for long. She put out one gloved hand, and touched the cold-cut end of a pruned branch where the tar had not yet gone on. And she said aloud to the tree, because there was no one else, and it was only manners, "Well, we're neither of us bearing this year." And then she went back in, because the light was going, and there was supper to see to. And a woman who has lost everything once already knows exactly how to put a thing down and keep walking. Vickery came on the 14th, and he came in a good coat, and he called Thomas Your Grace in the right tone, and he was entirely confident, which was Alice's whole design. They received him in the steward's room, and Thomas, who had wanted to be gentle, who had no stomach for this, sat at the head of the table and let Alice conduct it, because they had agreed she would. She was pleasant. She thanked Mr. Vickery for coming. She said only that a few of the tenants' receipts had turned up in the confusion of the flood, and she hoped he might help square them. And she began, mildly, with the home farm. "Mr. Braw's rent," she said, £31 the quarter, by your ledger. Here's the figure entered, in your hand. She turned the book. And here's Mr. Braw's own stub, the half he kept, for the same quarter. She set it beside. It says 33. A slip of the pen, said Vickery easily. It happens. One transposes a figure. Once, Alice agreed. This is 12 quarters. Here's the second. She set down another stub. Here's the third. Another. Every quarter for 3 years, Mr. Vickery. The same £2. Always the tenant charged more in his own book than the estate was ever credited. £2 a quarter from Braw. 1 from Ilsley. 30 shillings from the mill. She laid the stubs down, one after another, a small, quiet snowfall of paper, and her voice never rose at all. It comes to £11 a year, and a little over, for, she turned back through the ledger, 9 years. It's the 9th year that's careless. A man gets easy in the 9th year. Vickery's confidence did not break all at once. That is not how confidence goes. It failed in pieces, the way a bank fails. First a smile that stayed on a half-second too long, then an appeal to Thomas that began, Your Grace knows my years of service to this family, and found Thomas looking at the table, and not at him. Then a sentence about the difficulty of the work, and the impossibility of perfect books that simply ran out in the middle, unfinished, because he had looked up and seen at last that the room had already decided, and there was nothing his good voice could do to a room that had decided. He stopped talking. He sat with his hands flat on the wood, and looked at the little heap of stubs that a poor man had kept in a tin on his mantel, out of nothing but the habit of the careful poor, and he understood that he had been undone not by cleverness, but by exactly the kind of patient watching he had counted on no gentleman ever bothering to do. I have papers of my own, he said finally, low. References. Years of them. I don't doubt it, said Alice. Good ones, I expect. A man in your line collects nothing else. She squared the stubs, and it was done, and she could have finished him then. The room was hers. Thomas would have called the constable that hour, and Vickery knew it, and waited for it with his hands flat on the table. She did not. You'll repay it, she said instead, quietly. The £11 a year, from the 9th year back to the 1st, over what time is reasonable, and Mr. Brew and the others made whole first. You'll do it out of the shop your wife keeps in the village, which I'm told does well, and no one in this room will speak of why. Not for your sake, Mr. Vickery. For hers, who kept an honest counter while you kept a dishonest book, and doesn't deserve to be the thief's wife in a village that small. She stood. Go home. There's nothing more wanted of you today. He went. He stopped at the door as though he might say something, and found there was nothing, and went. And that was the end of it, and nothing else happened in that room after she let him keep his name, because there was nothing else that needed to. That night she began, quietly, to pack her trunk. It was the low ebb of the whole business, and it happened in her own small, cold room at the top of the house, at 11 at night, with a single candle, and only Suki for a witness, who had come up to see was there anything wanted, and found her mistress folding a plain grey dress into a trunk that had been empty on the floor for 3 months. You're never going, Suki said from the door. Ma'am, you're never. The house is saved. You saved it. Why would you go now? Because it's saved, said Alice, and did not stop folding. That's the whole of the reason, Suki. I came to mend a broken house, and the house is mending. There's no honest work left here that another woman couldn't do, and a great deal of— She smoothed the dress. Of other things that there's no work in at all, and no wage, and no future either. And I'll not stay in a place to want what I can't be paid in. I told him at the start I'd not be paid in promises. I'll not pay myself in them now. She laid the dress in the trunk. A person that's lost everything learns one useful trade above all the others, and it's this: how to know when a thing is over, and to leave while it's still her own choice to. I'll not be sent away in the spring with a sum of money and his gratitude. I'd rather go now, in the dark, owing nobody, and owed nothing, on the Thursday coach, the way I came. She looked, for one moment, very tired. It's not sad, Suki. It's only sense. Go to bed. Suki did not go to bed. Suki went down the back stairs and across the cold hall, and knocked on the door of a duke who was not sleeping either, and told him, in a rush, twisting her apron, exactly what she had seen. He came down in the morning as she was carrying the trunk into the hall herself, there being no one else to carry it. And there were people in the hall. There was Pardew, come up from his cottage without being sent for, and Suki, and Bro the farmer with his tin of stubs still in his coat, come to thank her, and finding her leaving, and the old woman from the lodge, and 2 of the tenants. Word travels in a small place. Half the estate seemed to be in the hall, and Thomas stopped on the stairs, and saw the trunk, and saw her face, and understood that she meant it. He was very bad at what he said next. Don't, he began, and stopped. He came down the last stairs. You said you'd not be paid in promises. I've none to offer. I know that. I've a house that's still half ruined, and a name that's worth less than your ledger, and a brother in Lancaster. I've a letter to answer, and I stood in this hall once and let a good thing be sent away because I was a coward, and I told myself it was sense. He was not fluent. His hands did not know what to do. I've been a coward twice in my life, and I'll not— Alice, stay. Not to mend the house. The house is— hang the house. Stay because He could not finish it. He stood in front of the whole estate, and could not finish the sentence. And then he did, plainly, having no better way. Because it's you. That's all I have. It's you. And then, because there was nothing else in him that would serve, the Duke of Hahn went down on one knee on the cold flags of his own hall, in front of his tenants and his gardener, and the girl from the scullery, which was a most inconvenient floor, and looked up at a plain woman in a travelling coat, and waited. She looked at him a long moment. The hall was very quiet. "Get up," she said gently. "You'll ruin your knees, and Pardew's are worse, and I'll have the two of you to nurse." But she was not laughing, and her eyes were wet, and she did not step back. "I'll not be married out of gratitude, Thomas. Say it's not gratitude." "It was never gratitude," he said, still on the floor. "Gratitude's for the ledger. This is the other book." And that, of all things, was what did it. Her own words, given back to her, proof past any doubting that he had been listening all along in the plain currency she had taught him. She put out her hand, the same hand she had laid on the cut branch, and he took it, and got up, and the hall let out its breath all at once, and Suki burst into tears, and Pardew touched his hat, and Bro said, to nobody, "Well now," and the thing was done. They were married in the spring, in the small cold church, with the espaliers just breaking bud along the south wall behind the churchyard. Edmund came from Lancaster with his linen-draper's daughter, who turned out to have a laugh you could hear across a field, and no bitterness in her at all, and the two brothers stood in the porch afterward and did not say much, which between brothers is a great deal. Alice mended the house across the following year the way she had mended the accounts, slowly, honestly, apologizing to what had been let go and starting again. Vickery repaid the tenants and kept his name, and moved, in the end, to his wife's people 2 counties off, which was as much as anyone wished on him. Suki learned to keep the still-room accounts in a fair upright hand, not unlike her mistresses. Pardew lived to see the espaliers bare, and in the second autumn the whole south wall of them bore at once, 29 trees, black-freckled, ugly, unsaleable, the best apples in the north. And Alice stood among them in the low gold light, with the new Duchess's plain coat on, and one of the ugliest apples in her hand. And Thomas came and stood beside her, and she gave it to him without a word. And he ate it, and it was absurd, and it was the best thing either of them had ever tasted, and neither of them made it carry a moral. So here's the thing I'd leave you with, and then I'll let you go. The pretty apple, bred for the barrow, that tastes of nothing, and the ugly one in the corner of the wall that nobody bothered to breed for looks, and so was left alone to become entirely unimprovably itself. Which of the two would you rather be loved for being? Think on it, if you like, wherever you're warm tonight. And when you've a mind for another quiet house and another season's patience, come back, and I'll tell you one.